congratulations on winning the 15th Global Architecture and Design Awards.
Thank you very much.
It's a mesmerizing project, right? So I'll start by asking you to, give us a glimpse into the concept of the project, the McMurray Métis Cultural Centre project.
Yes, well, the McMurray Métis were settled near Fort McMurray, Alberta. And during the 1960s, there was a big oil boom, oil petrol industry in the area. So they called them squatters and displaced them out of their traditional ancestral land. And they built work towers for workers. So ever since then, the community it was dispersed, but they were trying to create a cultural center where they could coalesce and come back together. So in the spirit of reconciliation, the project has been incredibly meaningful in Canada because the McMurray Métis and the municipality were in conversation for decades, and the municipality donated land back to the community to build their cultural center.
Now, the project has also got a historical significance, right? So I'd like you to talk about the historical significance and how close was this project to you?
Well, I think you're right. History was literally made during the course of the project because the Métis people were kicked off their land in the late 70s. And since then, they've been trying to reestablish their community. And so the municipality recognized this and donated the land for the project. And other levels of government, the federal, the provincial, as well as also the municipality, again, contributed money for this reconciliation project. And it was an act of reparative justice to say, it was wrong when you were kicked off your land. And so now here's 8 acres of downtown land in order to build this cultural center.
And it was really meaningful to us because I'm of mixed ancestry as well. I have European, French, and Indigenous ancestries. And traditionally in Canada, Indigenous people went on reservations and the colonizing people established everywhere else. And Métis people were not allowed on reservation, but they had a lot of difficulty living with the settler culture because they looked different. They were, were of mixed ancestry. So the Métis were pushed west and north over and over again, and they used to settle on road allowance that were undeveloped yet. So they kept being pushed and pushed and pushed. So they were for 100 years old on their traditional territory in Fort McMurray. And when they were displaced, it was terrible. And we're so grateful that when we presented the concept for the building, which was really reclaiming the site as Métis symbol, the infinity symbol is the symbol of the Métis people. So the municipality loved the project and they agreed to donate the land back. And they also invested millions of dollars in the project as an act of reparation, of reconciliation.
Thank you so much. Now that we've touched upon the concept of the project, I'd also like to get an idea about the design of the project for our audience.
Well, so as Geneviève mentioned, the infinity symbol is the symbol of the Métis people. And so in order to really demonstrate that the land was being reclaimed, we thought that it would be really an amazing gesture if you would see that when you're on Google Earth. When you're
like powerful
when you're looking from Google Earth, you'll see it on the land. You'll see that infinity loop, and you'll know, oh, that's Métis land there.
And we weren't sure how the community would react because we did a lot of research. There was even an anthropologist that did a lot of research for the McMurray Métis. And when they had elders retreat to talk about the cultural center, they were talking about a traditional fort or log cabins, but they wanted a monument. So what we did is we turned the whole building into the monument itself. And it was quite a feat because buildings that are not boxes, for energy efficiency, you have to be very mindful of how you orchestrate the program. And Maginnis is brilliant in architecture, really, really optimize that.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, turning an infinity symbol into a building is how do you do that, but make it also rational and functional and cost effective? Because at the end of the day, if we don't have the money to build it, then it can't be built. So in order to make it as rational as possible, we made a long 2-story section right in the middle of the building. And that's where most of the program is housed. So it's sort of the easiest part of the most, normal part of the building. And at either end, it then ramps down into the ground. And that was important because we wanted the building to really emerge from the ground. And the public is invited to walk up and over and around and back down over the roof of the building. And along there's an interpretive timeline of Métis history that, with different interpretive exhibits as you go.
And the symbol of the Métis, the infinity symbol is really combining the European and the indigenous. So we had a more European amphitheater. And then the other side is the circular gathering space with a medicine wheel and the dreamcatcher trellis. So it's really the cultural exchange between indigenous and settler culture in a beautiful way that elevates everybody.
All right, we've touched upon the design, that being of an infinity symbol, right? Which relates to indigenous culture as well. But when you talk about design as well, was there a conscious effort from your end to also have the essence, the local indigenous essence in design of the project, barring the infinity symbol, which is more like the exteriors, right?
Yes. Well, we really wanted to have a circular gathering space where traditionally there's a fire circle for ceremony. It's not a square rectilinear society. They're really gathered around a circle. And we worked with an amazing structural engineer, Paul Miskamin, who created a rib structure out of wood for carbon sequestration. And the rib echoes the Métis traditional boats. It's the same type of ribbing that were traditionally used in the Métis skiffs and scows. So we use that. And then there's the solar cladding, the photovoltaic cladding. If you look at it, there's a discrete pattern on the cladding, and it emulates the Métis sash. So the Métis sash is a belt that Métis trackers used to wear around their waist to keep their coat close, and it had an arrowhead weaving in it. So we did only a diagonal, but when you look on the reflecting pool, the diagonal is reflected and creates the really distinct arrowhead of the Métis sash.
That's quite monumental, actually.
Thank you. I was just going to say, expressing the culture was really one of the main mandates of the project. The two main mandates were revitalizing Métis culture and creating a zero carbon incubator right in the heart of the oil sands, which is where all of the petrol industry in Canada is right in this location. And so creating a zero carbon building there was, quite an audacious act on behalf of the Métis. And cultural revitalization, we really tried to find every opportunity possible to express Métis culture. So the infinity loop.
The Dreamcatcher terrace. So on top of the tower, that's like an aurora borealis, the northern lights, there's a trellis that's vegetated with deciduous plants. And that trellis is shaped like a dreamcatcher, which is a really indigenous and Métis. Do you know dreamcatchers? It's a circle with feathers and beads. And so we really wanted to create something where they would feel protected by the dreamcatcher, which is traditional.
Métis people are the people of the river. We kept hearing about how they're on the Athabasca River and their whole culture and economy revolved around the river and bringing freight up and down the river in these boats, the skiffs that they're called. And so we really wanted to express that river nature of the people right at the front entrance of the building. And so instead of having roof drains, what we have instead is scuppers that pour the water out of right at the main entrance. And there's one particular channel that comes down at the main entrance. And then there's a sculpture in the ground that has the hydrology of Fort McMurray. So it's like the rainwater comes down and goes through this sculpture that resembles the hydrology.
So as a visitor, you can situate yourself in the landscape by looking at that feature. There's also the site. The site, when the McMurray Métis received it, was 3 baseball diamonds, so a monoculture of introduced grass. So what we did is we worked with ecologists and elders, and we harvested seed in the wild to replenish and regenerate the original and the edible plants. And there's a community kitchen when the medicine can be prepared and the traditional food. So we really wanted visitors and Métis people to be able to go and experience on the site the traditional ways of preserving food.
All right, we've touched upon the concept and design of the project, right, and also its historical relevance. So what was the development strategy of the project like? What were the phases involved in it?
It was a very, very aggressive schedule. So, we started working on the project in February 20. You might recognize that date as being pretty much when the COVID pandemic started. So right through the first year when we were doing the design, that was all undertaken during COVID and we couldn't fly to the site. So we drove several times.
In our electric car. So we showed up in petrol capital of Canada in our Tesla.
That was exciting. And then basically when they decided on the final design and they gave the go ahead, it was February 20. That was when they said, okay, it's a go. Let's move forward. And by the way, we want to start building this summer. So, it's only 4 months till summer and it's a pretty complex building. So how could we do that? Well, the only way was to do a phased tender. So to do the foundations first and get that package out by June so they can start building. And then while they're building the foundations, we would finish designing the rest of the building. So a fast track schedule, basically. So that introduced a lot of challenge and complexity. It meant that we were working on both finishing the design at the same time as we're reviewing the shop drawings and having weekly construction meetings. And then also at the same time that a lot of the building is being tendered. So we were producing tender drawing sets, detailed drawing sets, and also conducting the normal construction administration review that we do. So
it was very busy.
It was a busy time.
All right. So a lot of phases of the construction were running in tandem to each other.
Tandem, that's correct.
I mean, that happens when you require a lot of pace for the project.
That's right. And they, the client in Fort McMurray, it's quite far north. It's just below the Arctic Circle. So it's cold there. Like it can get to be minus 40, right? And so you can't really build through the winter. When it's 40, you just can't really pour concrete. Right. So, or you can, but you have to build a huge shelter and spend lots of energy trying to heat it up. And, it's very, very expensive. So because they recognized that they couldn't really build through the winter, it meant that the summer building season, the first one, we had to hit that. So we produced the foundation drawings in 3 months and got the ball rolling. And with the engineers, we got the structural drawing set out for November of that year. And then they started landing the structure in January. And then we got the rest of the drawing sets completed. The final drawing sets actually in 2020. That was the final drawing sets for December 20.
May I add something to the design?
Yeah, sure thing. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the interior spaces, Métis people are people of the river and the forest, so they're hunters and trackers. So we wanted to include a lot of wood into the finishes of the building for that and for carbon sequestration. But it's also, we wanted them to feel like they were almost walking in a forest. So the circular gathering space has this structure that's angular with the fire circle in the middle with the starry lights. So you feel like you're in a clearing in the forest sitting around the fire with your community. The atrium has a lot of green on the second level. So you walk in, same thing, you're like in a forest and there's the canopy of green above you. And that's like a birch forest near a river. And this green canopy inside the atrium has a function. 11% of the energy consumption of the building is for moisture because it's really up north and the heat is drying the air. So 11% is used for mechanical humidification. So instead of doing this, we introduce copious planting in the atrium for natural oxygenation and moisturization of the air through evapotranspiration. So it's we were wanted to work with nature to make the building perform better as opposed to mechanical systems.
But I doubt a project has ever been explained this poetically to me. So thought for Todd, we've touched upon how the project laid emphasis on its environmental responsibilities as well, right? But I'd like to get a bundle of thoughts of y'all to, just let us know how does this project stand firm to the environmental standards? Just a bundle of thoughts, finally.
Right. So at the outset of the project, we looked at different building rating systems, green building systems. So there's LEED and Living Building Challenge and Passive. So we reviewed a number of those with the client, and the client ultimately decided that the certification system that worked best for their priorities was the One Planet Living. The London Olympics in 2020 were a One Planet Living endorsed project.
2010 was Vancouver.
2020. Okay.
And they chose this one because it's not only about the building performance, but it's also about cultural equity, building performance definitely, but regenerative biodiversity. It's a more holistic rating system that considered beyond just the building itself. And that was really suitable for a reconciliation and culturally regenerative project.
And so we designed the project with that in mind to hit the targets that were established through the One Planet Living. But there was one other target that was really important, and that was zero carbon. It really had to be a zero carbon building. And so the Canada Green Building Council has a zero carbon building certification. And so that was also, the building is also registered for that. And both of those certifications require post-occupancy analysis to confirm that the targets were hit. So we won't know until the building has been completed and occupied for a year if both of those come through, but those are certainly the targets.
And the strategies too, we used a lot of wood inside the building to permanently sequester the carbon that was grown into the wood. There's also the regenerative landscaping. We quantified the regenerative landscaping compared to just grass. Having different layers and canopies of a forest sequesters a lot more carbon over time. So we quantified that as well. There's all the wood finishes indoor. We used phase change material indoors. So when the sun goes into the atrium, the heat is captured by phase change material, and in the evening, it releases it back naturally in the space. So we put a lot of thought in making the building perform well in this climate that's extreme. They're right below the Arctic Circle. And that's why the photovoltaic are vertical, because the sun angle is really low up north. So it makes sense to have the solar panels not on an angle, but on the vertical facade. So it's the skin of the building that's solar powered.
Considering the relevance that this project had, I'd assume cultural research was something that would have been done extensively. But, what were the other specific tools or pieces of research that the team used in the project?
Well, first of all, there's in Métis culture and Indigenous culture more generally in Canada, there's an oral tradition. And so the stories that are held by the elders are really where the knowledge is kept. And so for us, it was really important to interact with the elders and to try to do as many events as we could with the elders to hear the stories and to understand what their lifestyle was like and what they went through with all of these traumatic events and what their hopes and dreams were for the building.
And we tried as much as possible to spend time in the community. With COVID, it was difficult though. During the COVID pandemic, sometimes we didn't have access to go there because we didn't want to contaminate elders or people, but we did have several community engagement. We went to the Métis Festival. We participated actively. We had sessions with elders, with youth, with families, and we had surveys and questionnaires and a lot of interactive feedback with both us and the landscape architects. We also really studied all the material that has been documented for the past 10 years by Tim Clark, what's the name of his company?
He runs a consultancy called Willow Springs. He's a cultural anthropologist.
So there was a lot of documents. So we spent the first month reading all the research and the data that had been collected on the community. Then we met the board. Then we went back to meet the community. Then there was a big 3 days interactive workshops. Then there was a festival. So we really tried to immerse ourselves in the culture.
Okay, but apart from that, we've touched upon how wood was used as a material in this project, just also to meet the environmental standards. But what was the primary material in the project?
Well, we tried to use wood wherever we could. And that's for two reasons. One is that wood sequesters carbon until it either rots or burns, the carbon stays trapped in the wood. And two, because all of the Métis traditional building involves wood. So they lived in log cabins, they made carriages out of wood, they made boats out of wood. Their whole tectonic universe revolved around wood. And so that was important for the design of the building. But not all of the building could be made out of wood. There's a foundation that's concrete, for instance. And so for the foundation, what we tried to do is to use a Canadian technology that's called carbon cure. It's developed to blow carbon dioxide gas into the concrete while it's in the truck and it's mixing. And that causes a mineralization reaction to unfold where creates a synthetic limestone in the actual concrete, and it makes the concrete harder.
So it takes carbon emission from the industries and then it sequesters it permanently in the building, in the foundation of the building.
Okay.
And so that was used for all of the concrete in the building. And there is also some steel structure in the building. It was sort of unavoidable, or where it was uneconomic to use wood. If it would have cost 4 times as much as steel or something, then they use steel in those particular locations.
All right. But, also what were some kind of challenges that were involved in this project, from collaborating with the contractors and consultants and some other challenges as well? We've touched upon how rigid the temperature is, right? So that is a hardship in it as well. But how about the other challenges that the team faced?
Well, a Métis community is really diverse. And at the beginning, we had the amphitheater and we had more of a teepee-like structure on one side of the building. And some community members loved it and other communities didn't want it at all. So we worked back and forth and created a creative solution that everybody would love. And it was basically when the infinity wraps around to reach for the northern lights, it's like creating this spiraling up. So we did that instead of the original teepee that was in that area, and everybody loved it. So it was a good way to try to use creativity to create another alternative solution.
Yeah, we were clear that we did not want the design of the building to be something that would be controversial or divisive. in the community. We wanted the building to bring people together, not to create different camps and, then people are fighting with each other. So we had to move on from that teepee concept. And I think the spiraling up concept ended up turning out really well.
Yes.
We're very pleased with
Yes,
that.
and it's led by a board. So there's many people, right, that have different opinions. So we're always trying to find consensus and bring people together around one idea. It's an art that we learned a lot to develop, to bring it.
And of course, then there's the technical challenges of doing a building in a really extreme climate like that, where it gets to be very cold in the winter. And there's only 6 hours of daylight on December 21st. So, it's hard to produce solar energy when you only have 6 hours of daylight. There's also then, of course, all the technical challenges involved with it's on alluvial soil, which has a lot of clay in it. So we had to have a pile foundation. We couldn't just do raft or footings like we normally would. And then there's all the challenges involved in the fast track schedule, the phase tender, producing all of the drawings at the same time as doing all the construction administration, and then just global events. The building started during COVID, and then there's the war in Ukraine that caused this massive inflation in Canada. I don't know what it was like in India, but prices just went up by 25 in about a year.
The same thing in India as well. I mean, no one could hide from it, right?
I know. And it's created challenges, to see the prices go through the roof.
All right. So thank you for providing such insights about the project. I appreciate it. And one of the most poetic insights about a project I've ever heard. Thank you for your time.